Wind in the Willows, Chapter 1, The Riverbank. The mole had been working very hard all the morning, spring cleaning his little home, first with brooms, then with dusters, then on ladders and steps and chairs, with a brush and a pail of whitewash, till he had dust in his throat and eyes, and splashes of whitewash all over his black fur, and an aching back and weary arms. Spring was moving in the air above and in the earth below and around him, penetrating even his dark and lowly little house with its spirit of divine discontent and longing. It was small wonder, then, that he suddenly flung down his brush on the floor, said, "Bother," and "Oh, blow," and also "Hang spring cleaning," and bolted out of the house without even waiting to put on his coat. Something up above was calling him imperiously, so he scraped and scratched and scrabbled and scrooged, till at last, pop! His snout came out in the sunlight, and he found himself rolling in the warm grass of a great meadow. The sunshine struck soft on his fur. Soft breezes caressed his heated brow, and, after the seclusion of the cellarage he had lived in for so long, the carol of happy birds fell on his dulled hearing almost like a shout. Jumping off all his 4 legs at once, in the joy of living and the delight of spring without its cleaning, he pursued his way across the meadow till he reached the hedge on the further side. "Hold up," said an elderly rabbit at the gap. "Sixpence for the privilege of passing by the private road." He was bowled over in an instant by the impatient and contemptuous mole. "Onion sauce, onion sauce," he remarked jeeringly. It all seemed too good to be true. Hither and thither through the meadows he rambled busily, along the hedgerows, across the copses, finding everywhere birds building, flowers budding, leaves thrusting, everything happy and progressive and occupied. And instead of having an uneasy conscience pricking him and whispering whitewash, he somehow could only feel how jolly it was to be the only idle dog among all these busy citizens. He thought his happiness was complete, when, as he meandered aimlessly along, suddenly he stood by the edge of a full-fed river. Never in his life had he seen a river before. This sleek, sinuous, full-bodied animal, chasing and chuckling, gripping things with a gurgle and leaving them with a laugh, to fling itself on fresh playmates. All was a shake and a shiver, glints and gleams and sparkles, rustle and swirl, chatter and bubble. The mole was bewitched, entranced, fascinated. And when tired at last, he sat on the bank, while the river still chattered on to him, a babbling procession of the best stories in the world. As he sat on the grass and looked across the river, a dark hole in the bank opposite, just above the water's edge, caught his eye, and dreamily he fell to considering what a nice, snug dwelling place it would make. Then, as he looked, it winked at him, and so declared itself to be an eye, and a small face began gradually to grow up round it. A little brown face with whiskers, a grave round face with the same twinkle in its eye that had first attracted his notice, small neat ears and thick silky hair. It was the water rat, Ratty. Then the 2 animals stood and regarded each other cautiously. "Hello, Mole," said Ratty. "Hello, Rat," said the Mole. "Would you like to come over?" inquired the Rat presently. "Oh, it's all very well to talk," said the Mole, rather pettishly, he being new to a river and riverside life and its ways. Ratty said nothing, but stooped and unfastened a rope and hauled on it, then lightly stepped into a little boat which the mole had not previously observed. And the mole's whole heart went out to it at once, even though he did not fully understand its uses. Ratty sculled smartly across and made fast. Then he held up his forepaw as the mole stepped gingerly down. "Lean on that," he said. "Now then, step lively." And the mole, to his surprise and rapture, found himself actually seated in the stern of a real boat. "This has been a wonderful day," he said, as Ratty shoved off and took the sculls again. "Do you know, I've never been in a boat before in all my life." "Never been in a... Well, what have you been doing then?" "Is it quite so nice as all that?" asked the mole shyly, though he was quite prepared to believe it, as he leaned back in his seat and surveyed the cushions, the oars, the rowlocks, and all the fascinating fittings, and felt the boat sway lightly under him. "Nice? It's the only thing. Believe me, my young friend, there is nothing, absolutely nothing, half as much worth doing as simply messing about in boats. Simply messing," he went on dreamily. "Look ahead, Ratty!" cried the mole suddenly, but it was too late. The boat struck the bank full tilt. The dreamer, the joyous oarsman, lay on his back at the bottom of the boat, his heels in the air. "About in boats or with boats," Ratty went on composedly, picking himself up with a pleasant laugh. "In or out of 'em, it doesn't matter. Nothing really seems to matter, and that's the charm of it. Look here, if you've really got nothing else on hand this morning, supposing we drop down the river together and have a long day of it." The mole waggled his toes from sheer happiness, spread his chest with a sigh of full contentment, and leaned back blissfully into the soft cushions. "What a day I'm having! Let us start at once." "Hold hard a minute, then," said Ratty. He looped the painter through a ring in his landing stage, climbed up into his hole above, and after a short interval reappeared staggering under a fat wicker luncheon basket. "Shove that under your feet," he said to the mole, and passed it down into the boat. Then he untied the painter and took the sculls again. "What's inside it?" asked the mole, wiggling with curiosity. "Well, there's cold chicken inside it, cold ham, cold beef, pickled gherkin, salad, French rolls, cress sandwiches, potted meat, ginger beer, lemonade, soda water." "Oh, stop! Stop!" cried the mole in ecstasies. "This is too much!" "Do you really think so?" inquired Ratty. "It's only what I always take on these little excursions." But the mole never heard a word he was saying, absorbed in the new life he was entering upon, intoxicated with the sparkle, the ripple, the scents and sounds and sunlight. He trailed a paw in the water and dreamed long waking dreams. Ratty, like the good little fellow he was, sculled steadily on and forbore to disturb him. "So this is a river." "The river," corrected Ratty. "And you really live by the river? What a jolly life!" "By it and with it and on it and in it," said Ratty. "It's brother and sister to me, and aunts and company, and food and drink and washing. It's my world, and I don't want any other. What it hasn't got is not worth having, and what it doesn't know is not worth knowing. Lord, the times we've had together, whether in winter or summer, spring or autumn, it's always got its fun and its excitements. When the floods are on in February, and my cellars and basement are brimming with drink, or again when it all drops away and shows patches of mud that smell like plum cake, and the rushes and weed clog the channels, and I can potter dry-shod over most of the bed of it, and find fresh food to eat, and things that careless people have dropped out of boats." "But isn't it a bit dull at times?" the mole ventured to ask. "I mean just you and the river, with no one else to pass a word with." No one else... Well, I mustn't be too hard on you. You're new to it, and of course you don't know. What lies over there? Asked the mole, waving a paw. That? Oh, that's just the wild wood. We don't go there very much, we riverbankers. The squirrels are all right, and the rabbits, some of them, but the rabbits are a mixed lot. And then there's Badger, of course. He lives right in the heart of it. Wouldn't live anywhere else either if you paid him to do it. And beyond the wild wood again? Where it's all blue and dim, and one sees what may be hills, or perhaps they may not be, and something like the smoke of towns. Or is it just a cloud drift? Beyond the wild wood comes the wide world, said Ratty, and that's something that doesn't matter either to you or to me. I've never been there, and I'm never going, nor you either, if you've got any sense. Don't ever refer to it again, please. Here's our backwater at last, where we're going to lunch. Leaving the main stream, they now passed into what seemed, at first sight, like a little landlocked lake. Green turf sloped down to either edge, brown, snaky tree roots gleamed below the surface of the quiet water, while ahead of them the silvery shoulder and foamy tumble of a weir, arm in arm with a restless, dripping mill wheel that held up in its turn a grey-gabled mill house, filled the air with little clear voices speaking up cheerfully out of it at intervals. It was so very beautiful that the mole could only hold up both forepaws and gasp, "Oh my! Oh my!" Ratty brought the boat alongside the bank, made her fast, and helped the still awkward mole safely ashore. Then he swung out the luncheon basket. When all was ready, Ratty said, "Now pitch in, old fellow." And the mole was indeed very glad to obey, for he had started his spring cleaning at a very early hour that morning, as people will do, and he had not paused for a bite or a sup, and he'd been through a great deal since that distant time, which now seemed so many days ago. "Well, well," said Ratty, "I suppose we ought to be moving. I wonder which of us had better pack the luncheon basket." He did not speak as if he was frightfully eager for the treat. "Oh, please let me," said the mole, so of course Ratty let him. Packing the basket was not quite such pleasant work as unpacking the basket. It never is. But the mole was bent on enjoying everything. Still, somehow, things got finished at last, without much loss of temper. The afternoon sun was getting low as the rat sculled gently homewards in a dreamy mood, murmuring poetry things to himself, and not paying much attention to the mole. But the mole was still very full of lunch and self-satisfaction and pride, and already quite a bit at home in a boat, so he thought, and was getting a bit restless besides, and presently he said, "Ratty, please, I want to row now." Ratty shook his head with a smile. "Not yet, my young friend. Wait till you've had a few lessons. It's not so easy as it looks." The mole was quiet for a minute or two, but he began to feel more and more jealous of Ratty, sculling so strongly and so easily along, and his pride began to whisper that he could do it every bit as well. He jumped up and seized the sculls so suddenly that Ratty, who was gazing out over the water and saying more poetry to himself, was taken by surprise and fell backwards off his seat with his legs in the air for the second time, while the triumphant mole took his place and grabbed the sculls with entire confidence. "Stop it, you silly ass!" cried Ratty from the bottom of the boat. "You can't do it! You'll have us over!" The mole flung his sculls back with a flourish and made a great dig at the water. He missed the surface altogether. His legs flew up above his head, and he found himself laying on the top of Ratty. Greatly alarmed, he made a grab at the side of the boat, and the next moment over went the boat. He found himself struggling in the river. Oh my, how cold the water was, and how very wet it felt. How it sang in his ears as he went down, down, down. How bright and how welcome the sun looked as he rose to the surface, coughing and spluttering. Then a firm paw gripped him by the back of his neck. It was Ratty, and he was evidently laughing. The mole could feel him laughing, right down his arm and through his paw. Ratty got hold of a skull and shoved it under the mole's arm, and then he did the same to the other side of him, and swimming behind, propelled the helpless animal to shore, hauled him out, and set him down on the bank. When Ratty had rubbed him down a bit, and wrung some of the wet out of him, he said, "Now then, old fellow, trot up and down the towing path as hard as you can, till you're warm and dry again, while I dive for the luncheon basket." So the dismal mole, wet without and ashamed within, trotted about until he was fairly dry, while Ratty plunged into the water, recovered the boat, and finally dived in successfully for the luncheon basket and struggled to land with it. When all was ready to start once more, the mole, limp and dejected, took his seat in the stern of the boat, and as they set off, he said in a low voice, broken with emotion, "Ratty, my generous friend, I am very sorry indeed for my foolish and ungrateful conduct. My heart quite fails me when I think how I might have lost that beautiful luncheon basket. Indeed, I have been a complete ass, and I know it. Will you overlook it this once and forgive me, and let things go on as before?" "That's all right, bless you. What's a little wet to a water rat? I'm more in the water than out of it most days. Don't you think any more about it. And look here, I really think you had better come and stop with me for a little time. It's all very plain and rough. Still, I can make you comfortable, and I'll teach you to row and to swim, and soon you'll be as handy on the water as any of us." The mole was so touched by his kind manner of speaking that he could find no voice to answer him, and he had to brush away a tear or two with the back of his paw. Ratty kindly looked in another direction, and presently the mole's spirits revived again, and he was even able to give some straight back talk to a couple of moorhens who were sniggering to each other about his bedraggled appearance. When they got home, Ratty made a bright fire in the parlor, and planted the mole in an armchair in front of it. Having fetched him down a dressing-gown and slippers, and told him river stories until supper time. Very thrilling stories they were, too, to an earth-dwelling animal like the mole. Stories about weirs and sudden floods and leaping pike, and about herons, and how particular they are about whom they speak to, or about adventures down drains, night fishing with otter, and excursions far afield with badger. Supper was a most cheerful meal, but very shortly afterwards a terribly sleepy mole had to be escorted upstairs by his considerate host to the best bedroom, where soon he laid his head on the pillow in great peace and contentment, knowing that his new-found friend, the river, was lapping the sill of his window. This day was only the first of many similar ones for the emancipated mole, each of them longer and fuller of interest as the ripening summer moved onward. He learned to swim and to row, and entered into the joy of running water. And with his ear to the reed stems, he caught, at intervals, something of what the wind went whispering so constantly among them.